Greeting from Vietnam. Good morning to you, Brian. Thanks a lot for spending your morning to join our program and share with our audience about your upcoming book. Congratulations. And thank you so much for writing that book up for our readers around the world.
Well, thank you for having me back on. I've always enjoyed speaking with you, and so I look forward to this conversation.
And before we go into the book, I think it's good for our audience to know a little bit about who you are and the work you do. Brian, would you please do that honor first?
Sure. I spent the entirety of my career in the insurance industry, but more than 20 years ago came across the work of Dr. Robert Cialdini, who's the foremost expert in the world on the science of ethical influence. And I was just enamored with it and began to incorporate it into everything I was doing, the sales training, the coaching, leading, all of those things. And in parallel, I thought, you know what, I could maybe turn this into a business one day. So I started my company, Influence People, in 2009 and slowly began to work toward leaving the insurance industry and doing this full time. I did that 7 years ago, and now I work with clients and individuals to teach them about the research in social psychology around influence, but more importantly, how to put it into application so that they can achieve better results.
Wow. And I still remember vividly about how you got acquainted with Dr. Cialdini. And I think it's best for our audience also to have you to share a little bit about that stories for them so that they know how everything started from the beginning to make you into the becoming a influencer in the field of influencing, please.
Sure. So a coworker had given a video to my boss and I. She was studying for her master's at the Ohio State University, saw a video of Dr. Cialdini presenting at Stanford. And it was a marketing class. So she came over, she gives us the video and she said, I think you guys will really like this. I watched the video and the light bulb comes on. My first thought is, holy cow, the psychology that he's talking about, it's the foundation of all selling. It explains why certain approaches work and why certain approaches don't. Next thing was everything was based on research. And I'm an analytical individual. And so I really felt like I could confidently get behind this and support it because there was data. This wasn't motivational hype or fluff. There was real information behind it. And the third thing that stood out to me was his stance on ethics, that you could do this in an ethical, upright way, non-manipulative ways to influence people. So I start using the video. I'd show it around the company. We'd have conversations. In the meantime, I signed up for Stanford's marketing. They had lots of other wonderful resources. But one day, one of their marketing flyers hits my desk. And as I page through it, boom, there's Cialdini's picture, big picture of him. And in bold letters at the top, it says bestseller. Right underneath it in bold letters, call it influence, persuasion, or even manipulation. And my first thought was, I cannot believe they actually used that word manipulation to describe his work because he was so clear about non-manipulative ways. So I thought, well, either the copyright person didn't watch the video or they're just really bad at their job. So I emailed Stanford and I basically said this: I don't know anybody who wants to be manipulated. I don't know anybody who's looking to become a manipulator. That word cannot be helping your sales, but it's probably really hurting. Well, I never heard from Stanford, but sometime later my phone rang at work and it was a representative of Dr. Cialdini's company, Influence at Work. Chris introduced herself and said, I'm calling to personally thank you on behalf of Dr. Cialdini. It came to our attention that you sent an email to Stanford, and because of that email, they're changing the marketing of all of our material. I thought, wow, that is really cool. So we had this wonderful conversation. Before we hung up, she said, if your company's ever looking for a guest speaker, Dr. Cialdini travels the world to talk about this. I said, I sit next to the woman who plans our events and books our speakers. Would you like to talk to her? And as fate would have it, summer of 2004, Cialdini was in Columbus, Ohio several times to address the insurance agents that represented our company. And that was the beginning of my relationship with him.
Wow. What made you to email Stanford?
Sorry, say that again?
You know, back then, right, because of that word manipulated, and then you decided to take action on that. So I just want to know what drive in your head back then that make you make that move.
Yeah, I guess I will just say the moral part of me The part of me that recognized manipulation is not good. I think we all know that. But it was strong enough within me to say it needs to be addressed, that they should not be advertising his work. That was a misrepresentation of him and his work. And I just felt strongly that that should not be the case. And I'm so thankful that I did that, because if I would have just held that in and thought, oh, wow, those copyright people are terrible, I probably never would have met Dr. Cialdini. And when I spoke at his conference about a year and a half ago, it was called Influence Amplified. And I'm up on stage and Dr. Cialdini is in the front row down to the right. And before I started to speak, I said, I have to thank you, because you not only have changed the course of my career, obviously it's what I've been doing now the last 7 years, but you changed the course of my life, because your work changed how I interact with my wife, how we raise our daughter, how I work with and interact with my friends and family. It literally was life-changing for me. And when I shared that with him, I got teary-eyed. I had to stop. I got really emotional because I owe so much to him. And I just want to see people get the same kind of benefit in their life, professionally and personally, that I've gotten from learning and then putting into practice his work.
So 2014, that's the first time Dr. Cialdini came to your company and gave speech, right? So
2004, 10 years prior.
2004. Okay, so since when you become a part of his global team? And you said that there's only a few people been selecting to become in the the people in the under his wing.
Yeah. So once we had him come out that summer, my boss and I went out to Arizona and went through the 2-day workshop called the Principles of Persuasion. I had to stay on my boss for 3 years to finally allow me to go back and get certified to become what's called a Cialdini Method certified trainer. And that happened in early 2008. At that point, being a certified trainer, I could go out and represent myself as a representative of Dr. Cialdini's. And so I began to do a lot of internal workshops with leaders and in our field salespeople, and then eventually started doing workshops outside with our independent insurance agents who represented us. During that time too, I started to do things outside of the company, started to do a little bit of speaking and some training. So I was getting deeply immersed in every aspect of this. And I looked at the time at the insurance company, and I got certified in 2008. I left in 2018. So I had a decade to really work with the material, see how it impacted sales and leadership, got to learn how to market myself and market the workshops that we were doing with independent agents. And so I kind of had a foot in two worlds. I was deeply immersed in my corporate job, but I also was realizing all of the things I'm doing now will help me when I decide to finally step away. And again, that I made that decision in November of 2018.
November 2018, 7 years ago, right? I think prior to that 2004, or before the day that you sent the email to Stanford, you seem to me that you've been looking for the answer somewhere in the works from Dr. Cialdini actually popped up and it resonated with you about influences, right? So why did you go into that quest looking for that answer?
Well, I had read Stephen Covey's 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. I'd read that many years before. And the one thing I took from the book, I wrote the personal mission statement. And that mission statement starts at the top. It says, when I die, I want to hear God say, well done, good and faithful servant. You are faithful with a few things. I will put you in charge of many things. Enter into the joy of your master. And then I talked about my faith, my family, my personal well-being, and my career. In that order, those are the priorities of my life. But when you think about the whole well done, how do you ultimately live that out? Some people think, well, I have to go into ministry. I have to go into the mission field or something. And I thought about that for a while. But then I started to see, when I bumped into Cialdini's work, I had a real passion for it. And I also obviously have a passion for my faith. And so as I started to think about it and these two started to converge, I realized if I can help people enjoy more professional success and do so in an ethical way, if I can help them enjoy more peace and happiness at home in an ethical way by understanding how to ethically influence people based on this research, well, that's a really good thing, right? I mean, your success at the office may open up doors for sending your kids to college, paying for your daughter's wedding, the dream vacation, retirement, all of these things that are so important. Or on a personal level, to be able to have a better relationship with your spouse or a better relationship with your children or your neighbors, those are all good things. And I think God would say, well done. And so to be able to combine these two just has been really, really wonderful. And the further I go in my understanding of influence and my walk with the Lord, the more I see the tie-in between the two.
Mm. So in your world, how do you define influence though?
Well, when I talk about influence can be a broad term that can encompass a lot of things. Very specifically, I talk a lot about persuasion. And when I talk about persuasion, I use Aristotle's definition. Aristotle said that persuasion was the art of getting someone to do something they wouldn't ordinarily do if you didn't ask. And so when you recognize how we communicate can make all the difference between yes and no. What we have now that Aristotle did not have is we've got 9 decades of research into this field where social psychologists and behavioral economists put into play different scenarios to see how people will respond. And so we can come back with confidence and say there are better ways to communicate based on the research that we have. So within that umbrella of influence, there's persuasion. We also talk about persuasion. What is it that we can do? How can we arrange for an audience to be receptive to our message before we ever deliver it? And I like to just boil that down to how do we set the stage? You know, there are things that someone can ask you today, and if you're in a wonderful mood, you might say yes. But if they ask you tomorrow and you're not in a good mood, very same ask, you might say no. So I hope that alerts everybody to the reality that sometimes we can be asked the very same thing, but could be where we are mentally, physically, or emotionally, could impact our willingness to say yes to the very same message. So people who really master the process of influence recognize not just what they need to do in the moment, but how can they set up that moment so that they have the best chance of hearing yes when they do make that ask.
And what is that called? Persuasion?
Persuasion. So a little play on the word persuasion. Pre-suasion. And that's really what we do before we try to persuade.
Wow, wow. Thanks for teaching me something new. I didn't even know about that until you tell me that one. Brian, you wrote books, you train companies, you train individuals on influence, on persuasion and persuasion, right? And you wrote books about that. So this new book, where that idea come from?
So the new book is called Influenced from Above, where faith and influence meet. And the spark for the idea came from my daughter. So many years ago, I did a presentation here in town, Columbus, Ohio, and she hadn't seen me present for quite some time. I invited her, and the day after we had lunch, and we were talking about the presentation, and she was sharing, you know, what she thought about it. But then she asked the question that became the spark for the book. She said, "Dad, what I want to know is where is God in all this? All this psychology you teach, where does he fit in?" And we began to have this wonderful conversation, and I hadn't thought about it really deeply until that point. But what I found myself saying, a couple things were, I said, Abigail, in a corporate environment, I can't necessarily talk about love. But if I put this principle of liking into practice the right way, where it's not about me getting you to like me, but it's about me coming to like you, then when I really like you, I want what's best for you. And I said, that gets pretty close to love. Or reciprocity is not about me just doing something to get you to do something for me. I want to give because I've come to know and like you, and I want what's best. And Jesus said, better to give than receive. Do unto others as you would have them do unto you. So we had this conversation, and that is what got me thinking, I need to write a book about how these biblical principles support these principles of persuasion that I've been teaching for about 15 years, maybe at that point.
And how long did it take you to do the research and combine all the ideas together to write this book?
Well, because I'd been thinking about it a lot, and I'd written some things that talked about faith and influence, I actually started the book writing process in February. And I was able
This
to,
year.
yeah, I was able to write a lot. My wife and I went down to Florida to see my stepmom, and my wife and stepmom loved to golf, so they were off golfing. And every morning I had several hours to work. And then a lot of times in the late afternoon, I had another few hours. So I was putting in 3-4 hours a day of really beginning to think about this and write. And one of the things that helped me immensely was utilizing ChatGPT as an editor. So I would write a chapter, and then just like I would give it to an editor, I would put it into chat and I would ask for feedback. It would make grammatical corrections. It would make suggestions. I'd go back and rework it, drop it back in. And I kept this iterative process going. And then I moved to chapter 2. And then I did the same thing. I moved to chapter 3. And then I would pause and say, okay, act like you're a developmental editor. You know, are the characters in line? Is there anything I'm missing? And sometimes it would give a suggestion, just like a real editor would. I'd think about it. Oh, I like it. I'm going to incorporate that. I don't like that. I'm going to leave that one alone. But it really helped me to be able to crank out. I think I got 20 of my 30 chapters written within a span of a few weeks, and then continued on with the writing and the refining after that.
So who's the target audience for this book?
I would say the audience broadly are two groups of people. First would be people who are fans of Dr. Cialdini and his work and want to see a different way of looking at and thinking about the principles. The other would be Christians who really are looking for ways to ethically bring in business practices where they can feel good about themselves in terms of how they're interacting with people. And so for them to see that these principles that could be used manipulatively for sure, but how they're supported by biblical principles to give depth to them, I think it will really resonate with that group as well.
Because the idea of faith and influences is, I think, is to a lot of people is also new, right? And so when your subtitle of the book is Where Faith and Influence Meet, tell us a little bit about that, please.
So the book is kind of a prequel, or excuse me, a continuation of the book that I wrote years ago called The Influencer: Secrets to Success and Happiness. That book, you're introduced to John Andrews. You meet him when he's born and you follow him as he goes off to college and gets into his career. And that book looks at how a story format to learn about Cialdini's principles. And he's learning from mentors and coaches and coworkers, and he's pulling together all of this thought process around influence. Well, that book ends with him retiring in his mid-50s. And I always thought there's another book there. He's got a whole life ahead of him. So this book, actually, he's 18 months into retirement, and he's starting to feel like there's got to be more to life than just enjoying the fruits of my labor, going on nice vacations, etc. He's got this gnawing feeling there's something more. And ultimately, he gets involved with his church to help with a community center building project. And he has to then straddle the line of the secular world, like dealing with the city council and the zoning board and business owners. But he also has to deal with his faith-based community. And he recognizes what worked at work may not necessarily work with the faith-based community. And certainly faith-based things may not necessarily work in the secular world. How do I bring these two things together? And there's several chapters where through his studies, he starts making a connection between the principles of what we call persuasion or principles of influence and biblical tenets that have been with us for thousands of years.
So Abigail was a source of motivation asking you a question, where God is in all of this, right? So when you write the book, and I bet that she's the one that have a first hand on the book also. What did she tell you about, you know, the book?
I'm sorry, rephrase that.
What I was saying is like, because this book starts from the idea that Abigail asked you,
Mhm.
where God is in all of this, right? And then that triggered the idea for you to write a book. So after you wrote this, what did she say about that?
Well, she hasn't read it yet.
Oh, she
So
hadn't read it
no,
yet.
but obviously she's honored the fact that her question is what sparked the interest to write the book. And actually, the John Andrews, his wife is named Abigail. So anybody who would read the book, you'd be reading, about a parallel to my daughter. I mean, as I was thinking of that character, I'm always thinking about Abigail, and she was in the first book too, because she meets John and they get married. So yeah, she's really sparked a lot for me in terms of thinking about my faith. And it's been wonderful, that many years ago, this goes back into the 90s, when I was leading several Bible studies. As I would read through the Bible, I started putting down all of my thoughts, and it turned into a kind of commentary. I mean, it's about 1,000 pages of my thoughts regarding the Old Testament and the New Testament. And now that she's an adult and she's a mom, as she's reading through the Bible, she refers to my notes, and we text quite a bit about, what did you mean by this? What do you think about that? And it is wonderful as a parent to be able to sow into your children's lives, even when they're adults.
Wow. So that is also influence and faith meets, right? It's because years ago in the 90s, you're starting to write things like that. So that hopefully that influence will span across time also, right there,
Yeah,
Brian.
it would be like having a foundation of fitness because you're involved in all these things, but then you decide to take up a particular sport like running or taekwondo or something. But you have this base of fitness under you because you've done healthy things. I had a strong spiritual base because of all that time leading those Bible studies, our time at church, writing that biblical commentary. So it wasn't as if I had to start from scratch. I had a great idea of how these pieces fit together, but I hadn't sat down and really started organizing those thoughts.
Hmm. I know the next question is not going to be fair for you, but I have to ask you this question. If you pick one chapter out of the book that you want to share with our audience today, right? So what would that chapter?
Um, there's a chapter, and I forget which chapter number it is. I want to say 3 or 4, where the lead character, John, is wondering, does God really answer prayer today? I mean, generically, people go, oh, yeah, God answers prayer. But he's like, I'm not sure that I've seen it so directly in my life. And why does he sometimes answer it for people and not for other people? And as he's struggling to find out if this is really what he should be doing, he lays out his fleece, much like Gideon did in the Old Testament. And I won't tell you the resolution of that, but I will say that chapter parallels something that took place in my life. When we were trying to have children, we recognized pretty early on we weren't going to be able to have children through normal means, that we were going to have to use in vitro fertilization. And I remember praying and I said, God, if we're going to have a child and Jane is going to stay home, we're going to have to refinance our house and we're going to have to change a lot of things. And I'm not going to do that hoping that we have a child. If we will have a child or we won't. And so I'm not making any moves until I hear from you. Well, I didn't hear anything. So after some period of time, I'm praying again. And I said, God, I'm going to lay out my fleece. Just like Gideon did. I'm going to put out my fleece. And if the interest rate would hit 7.5%, now this goes back into the mid 90s when interest rates were still pretty high. And I said, if the interest rate would hit 7.5%, I would take that as a sign, like Gideon, that I should act. So after that, I start looking at interest rates and they're doing nothing but kind of going up. And I forgot about it for a period of time. And then one day I'm sitting at in the front of our house, I'm doing some work, and a thought just cuts right across. Bill Clinton is speaking on TV tonight. If people don't like what he says, interest rates will go up. It was that clear. I picked up the phone. I called my mortgage company. I said, what's the mortgage rate? They said 7.5%. I said, I want to refinance my house. And from that day, they went up to about 9% after that conversation. That to me was a very clear answer to prayer. I mean, it was so specific. And so the book has some stories that kind of parallel things that have actually happened in my life or in our lives, my wife and I's lives, because I do believe God still hears and God still speaks to us today. It's just that so often we are preoccupied with so many other things that we're not paying attention to how he is speaking to us.
I think that a lot of people watching our interviews are also interested one day that they be able to write their own books also. Okay, and your ability to articulate ideas and write down to a book, but also the ability to remember memories vividly, to put it and becoming a story onto your book. Out of the busy life, so many things, so many responsibilities, so many activities that you've been doing over the years. What did you do to make you being able to remember those things in your life?
So I journaled a lot.
Mm.
When I got in that habit when I was a sophomore in high school, an English teacher required us to keep a journal. And to be truthful, as 15-year-old boys, we thought it was dumb. But so much was going on that year, between playing varsity football, started dating a girl, my parents ended up separating. There was just a lot going on. I wrote handwritten hundreds and hundreds of pages of, 8x10 notebook paper. And then I had to do more when I was a junior. I wrote some when I went off to college. Now, I didn't do it every day and I didn't do it every year. But then early in our marriage, I started journaling again and did so for many years. So I had a lot of experience writing. In my role with the insurance company, I started writing a monthly publication about sales. So not really related to my book, but I just was in the habit of writing. When I started blogging, which was 15 years ago, I set a goal to write every single week, at least one article. And so for 15 years, almost every single week, I've published an article. A lot of that writing then can become the basis of, like, my first book, Influence People, my next book, Persuasive Selling. I'd been writing about that stuff. So I was able to pull a lot of that content and start working with it and adding to it. And I felt like I had that foundation of fitness that I just needed to pull from for a different project. But what I would encourage somebody to do, so somebody could be watching or listening and say, well, I haven't been doing that. Start today. Just start whatever interests you, write about it, or it could be your life, write about it. Get in the habit of doing that with some consistency, because you really need that. If you're going to write a book, you have to lay out kind of a plan and be very consistent. I can't tell you, how many times I've heard people say, oh yeah, I started writing a book, but I just got busy. They just didn't. That's like saying, yeah, I was training for a marathon and I just got busy and I stopped. Well, are you going to ever go back? You put in all that time, you've got a foundation of fitness. You've got to be disciplined about giving yourself space to be able to do that.
So you mentioned about the word discipline right there. So where that source of discipline coming inside of you?
It would be two places, sports and coaches, requiring us to be at practice and things. But also my dad, who, served in the Marines. And when I say he was a disciplinarian, he wasn't like, he's going to backhand you or any of that stuff. Very rarely, except from when we were very little, was there a spanking or anything. But my dad instilled discipline in me. One of the stories I wrote in the book about our relationship was, as a 10 or 11-year-old, I had promised a neighbor that I would cut their grass, and I got about halfway done, and for a variety of reasons, I quit. Well, I got disciplined. I had to spend the weekend in my bedroom. I was grounded, and that's back in the day when, I didn't have a TV in there, and there wasn't internet. There was nothing. It was boring. It was just sitting in your room with the clock slowly passing. But I remembered that lesson, and the lesson was, you start something, you never quit. And I've never quit on anything that I've started. I've been careful about what I choose to start, because I know I'm not going to put myself into this and turn around and quit. So do I want that thing enough for me to pour all of the best of me into it? And if I do, then Katie, bar the door, I'm going with 100%.
Mm-hmm. When you said that you carefully to pick anything to start, something to start, right? So you pick on the field of influencing to start already long ago. What do you want the people to have, in the future related to influencing?
Okay. Well, let me back up and share this to give more context too. I tell people I don't do a lot of things, but the things I do really well. So I got very enamored in high school and college with weightlifting. I competed as a power lifter, and then I competed in bodybuilding. After I stopped that, about a decade later, I started running marathons. Well, I was all in on that, and I realized pretty quickly I could do well, and I qualified and ran the Boston Marathon a couple of times because I just wanted to be the best I could be. I had no illusions that I was going to win the Boston Marathon, but how good can Brian Ahearn get, given the constraints of my life, family, etc.? From there, it was Taekwondo, and I ultimately got my second degree black belt in Taekwondo. So 3 things that I poured myself into to see how far can I go, again, given the constraints of my life. So when it comes to influence, it was kind of the same thing. I was so enamored by it and just felt so passionately about sharing it that was the thing I was going to do. So when I started Influence People, that is what I do. I help people apply influence to their leadership, to their sales, to their management. But if somebody comes to me and says, Brian, can you teach us a leadership model? No, there are people who do that. I can help you be a better leader within that model by understanding how to influence. I don't develop sales processes for people. There are folks who are experts at that and the metrics and all of those things. But once you have your process and you want to make it better because you can more easily influence people in an ethical way, I can help you with that. So again, this is just a kind of a picture. I'm taking that one thing and I want to be the best that I can possibly be at that.
Wow. Wow. In case of our audience want to get in touch with you and want to order the books, right? So how do they do that, right?
Well, the book will be available on Amazon starting October 21st. Anybody who wants to get in touch with me, there are 2 primary ways. One would be my website, influencepeople.biz. And if they go out there, they will see that I've been, like I said, blogging weekly for more than 15 years. I've been on hundreds of podcasts. There are videos. Then there are links to my LinkedIn courses and the other books that I've written. The other way would be to connect with me on LinkedIn. So anybody who reaches out, I am happy to connect with them. I will ask them how they found me. It's nice to know where the traffic's coming from or why they want to connect. But as you know, I post daily. So anybody who is interested in learning more about how to ethically influence people, if they're following me every single day, they're going to see something about how to influence people. So almost in a drip marketing fashion, they will learn about the skill of influence.
Wow. Wow. I have a few last questions, and it's outside of the book. But I every chance that I have every time I have a conversation with you, I love to talk to you and ask a few more questions. So about 4 weeks ago, my wife and I bought a website called sustainabilitymind.com. So we want to help people to build the mindset of sustainability. And whatever you do, you help leaders to get better at what they do by understanding the power of influence so that they can lead well, they can build better relationship and drive better performance for lasting. So it's somewhere related to sustainability, right? So I just want to hear from you. If you define a sustainability mind, what is that in your world?
What is a sustainable life?
Sustainability mind.
Oh, it's okay. My wife has been pretty involved with Conservation International, so I would say that parallels sustainability. I mean, it's about preservation of the rainforests and other natural habitats, and has learned a lot about how they benefit society. And so the last 7 years, she has hosted a golf tournament that raises money and gets matching funds. And she didn't really know anything about it until she started hosting the golf tournament and said, okay, we'll raise money for this cause. And so she's a very curious person by nature. She began to learn a lot, and she would share with me things that were going on. How long it takes a toothbrush to decay in a landfill, things like that, and that maybe we should be using different materials. Where I've seen the sustainability mindset come from her to me is just my thought process around taking a few more steps to recycle something where in the past I probably wouldn't. To maybe take food scraps that she'll collect food scraps, and then her boss has a compost pile and she gives them to him and he dumps them out there. And so they're little steps, but if everybody was taking those little steps, that would make a big difference in terms of sustainability and conserving the environment and doing the things that are really important. The other thing that I think about too is the messaging around that. And so I will share with you a couple things. One, persuasion can become very important, right? Just diving in and asking somebody to maybe donate to sustainability, they might be like, oh, no. But if you ask the right questions where they start to say, well, yeah, the environment's important, and well, yeah, I want to make sure that my kids or my grandkids have an environment that's healthy. You're kind of walking them in this path to get them to realize it's more important to you than you realize. Then they might be more willing to donate. The other thing is too that I think, especially now being a grandparent, I am going to be much more willing to do things thinking about Emmett growing up and how will it impact him. I am more concerned about that than how it may impact me. I mean, I've lived a good long life already, and God willing, hopefully I live decades more, but hopefully he's going to be around this earth for 80, 90, who knows, with technology, maybe 100 years. Mm-hmm. So I'm more concerned with him than I am with me in terms of some of these like sustainability issues.
Wow, beautiful. Thank you so much for that. And along the way, you mentioned about thinking. Okay, and I think that whatever for influencing, for sustainability, anything we start by the way we think also. So the same question I asked you last time, I just want to hear from you again. This time is how have you been growing your ability to think, Brian?
I think it's primarily been around the combination of faith and influence. As I mentioned before, I'd kind of had sporadic thoughts, but I hadn't pulled them together. And for me, what's happening is the more I learn about influence, the deeper I go. When I first learned about it and was certified by Dr. Cialdini, I got out into the world and I thought, I'm an expert at this. I can help you. And to a degree, I was an expert. I learned from the foremost authority in the world. But I look back now and I realize I didn't know as much as I thought I did. Very similar to as we grow up, right? When we're kids and teenagers, we think we know it all. And then we go to college and we realize we didn't know a lot. And then we get in the working world and we realize we got a lot to learn still. And so I've been going deeper all the time in terms of not just understanding these principles, but then like, how do they apply to selling? Specifically in the sales cycle? How do they apply to leadership? And I just feel like I keep getting deeper. But for me, moving from just talking about ethical influence to really like eternal influence goes even deeper. That it's not just about, building a relationship to get some work. That's important. It's important to help the client. It's important to earn an income. But when I start thinking about the relationships I'm building with people, and I have an opportunity to have an eternal impact on these people,
Mm.
that's where my thinking is at this point in time. It's just getting to something much, much deeper than just understanding these principles and how to put them into practice.
Beautiful. Thank you. The last question is for me. Okay. If you see what I do, we've been forming a company called helloNEWNESS. All right, and we came up with the framework called NEWNESS to help people to embrace new things in life, so that they get themselves, like you say earlier, it's about beauty the foundation, and then from that foundation, they can get themselves ready for change and welcome change, right? And when I look at what you just shared, from influence, you try to see a new idea that you can go deeper, go deeper. That is where newness is coming to your works, right? So if you look at the importance, or if not importance, from newness in your life, how do you see it in your life?
How do I see newness? Well, right now, being a grandfather, and Emmett is almost 7 months old, looking at the world through his eyes. And I start finding myself thinking things like, he has no idea what a cloud is, what the sky is, what the sun is, but he's looking at these things. And I know that his mind is making all of these connections to one day he'll say, cloud. And he'll have a concept that we share as to what a cloud is and what the sun is. And that, for me, gets me thinking differently than prior to him coming into the world. I mean, my daughter helps me think differently. My wife helps me think differently. But this is at a whole different level because I'm trying to wrap my mind around all that's taking place in his little brain to sort out this world and to understand soon that, oh, grandpa, grandma, grandpa's house and all of these things. So that's kind of the newness for me. And I really look forward to, being able to read books that were so enjoyable when we read to our daughter, or to sit down and watch a TV show with the wonder of a child, because sometimes they're watching that and they think it's real. And just to allow yourself to get so immersed in those things, to enjoy the holidays at a different level, all of this stuff is bringing back a newness that we experienced almost 30 years ago when our daughter was first born.
Wow. Wow. Brian, thank you so much for this beautiful conversation, and congratulations for writing the book and to bring your idea, bring your work, bring to the readers around the world. Thank you so much for doing that. Also, thank you so much for sharing a lot of insights about how to think, how to build sustainability in life, how to influence with ethics, and how to bring back the child mind inside of us to see things around us, so that we can celebrate every single day a little bit different than what we used to do. So, Brian, I look forward to share our interviews to our audience when the book launch, and I wish the book launch to be a huge success like it used to be for the other books. Okay?
Okay. And can I say one more thing?
Please.
Anybody listening to this show, if you buy the book and you email booklaunch@influencepeople.biz with the name of the second chapter, I will send you a free e-version of the prequel book, The Influencer. So if you want to read that to see the backstory of this guy, you will have that. But you email to booklaunch@influencepeople.biz, just the title of the second chapter in the book, and then you'll automatically get a link to that copy.
Wonderful, wonderful. I'll email you to make sure that I got the link correctly to put onto the show note also. Okay.
All right.
All right, Brian. Have a wonderful day. Say hello to your family. Say hello to James, Abigail, and kiss Emmett for us, please. We love you a lot.
Absolutely. You tell Vivian hello from me.
Yes, thank you very much. Bye bye for now.
Bye bye.
Bye bye.